You may not want to admit it, but like everyone, you've probably toyed with the idea of revenge. Even if you've never acted on it, I bet you've had the urge to get back at someone for something they've done to you. I mean, how could you deny it? I see how much of this you put into your fiction. It's obviously very important to you humans. There are so many stories about it. A man is falsely imprisoned and dedicates his life to tracking down his jailer. A monster is created into a life of suffering and does everything in its power to bring the same misery to its creator. A group of mobsters kill a man's dog and swiftly come to regret that decision. That's what revenge is, right? Justice, the urge to restore the balance to the world. It's only fair, after all. This understanding of revenge is so common, it's even a part of social institutions and cosmologies. The death penalty is still authorized and administered in 27 of the United States. The concept of karma implies that every action has a proportionate cosmic reaction, good or bad. So, if revenge is just a method of enforcing justice, something morally good, why does it sometimes feel so wrong? I mean, think of how often revenge plots and stories are about murder and manipulation, sometimes in ways that are worse than the original slight. Why is it that we rally behind these revenge seekers, can see their missions as righteous, even when we normally consider what they're doing evil? Are you enjoying the video so far? I hope so. We release one of these pretty much every week, which means that, after this one, you'll have to wait at least another 7 days for your next Foundry fix. Although, technically, you don't really have to. We've actually made a ton of stuff that isn't up here on YouTube, like this video about the morphology of angels and why artists always give them wings, or this one about artificial life as a magic system. We even made a whole original series called Worldsmiths about our favorite authors and the unique landscapes of their minds. And hey, if you just don't want to wait for next week's YouTube video, the truth is, it's actually already out. That's right. You can watch it right now, ad-free, along with everything else I just mentioned, over on our streaming platform, Nebula. Visit go.nebula.tv/TaleFoundry to sign up for just $2.50 a month. Or, if you join right now, you could get a lifetime membership for just $300 altogether. Pay for it just once, and then never again. It's honestly one of the cheapest and best ways to support the show. Thanks so much to everyone who checks it out. There's a lot of room for complexity around this topic, but let's start with something a little less nuanced. It's very easy to see revenge as a good thing when it's proportional. A punishment that seems to match the caliber of the crime committed feels just. You see this everywhere in fiction. The movie The Princess Bride has what is probably one of the most iconic examples of a revenge-driven character ever, the master swordsman Inigo Montoya. I'm sure his catchphrase is already ringing through your mind.
Hello. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
After witnessing his father's murder at the hands of Count Rugen, the six-fingered man, Inigo Montoya makes it his life's mission to kill the Count. When he finally manages to do it, even giving the Count scars to match the ones he received from him as a child, it's poetic and satisfying. Inigo's mission is generally considered morally justified, and the audience roots for him the entire time. It also helps that Inigo is characterized very favorably in the narrative, being good-natured and a loyal friend. Since we see Inigo as a good guy, it's easy for us to imagine that his motivation is also good. There's also the fact that, in his quest for vengeance, Inigo never takes any innocents down with him. He keeps his goal fair and proportionate to the original act. One man killed out of cruelty, one man killed out of vengeance. If Inigo had gone out of his way to murder other people on his path to hunt down his father's killer, I'm sure that would spoil the fun a little bit for us following along at home. His reasoning would still be justified, but would the methodology of his revenge affect how we view its morality? It's hard to say looking at the gleaming example of righteous fury that Inigo sets. Lucky for us, there's another piece of literature that explores this question quite well, a much less proportionate revenge plot that is just ripe for the picking apart. Shakespeare's Hamlet. It's a very complicated story that starts off similar to Inigo's and then sort of spirals off. It's another getting revenge for my dead dad story, but this time it's not as cut and dry. When the ghost of Hamlet's father tasks him with taking revenge on his murderer, King Claudius, Hamlet upends pretty much everything in order to carry out his father's wishes. Though he does eventually kill King Claudius, he's pretty inefficient and takes the entire Danish court down with him. These additional deaths were all avoidable had Hamlet killed Claudius when he had the opportunity, but his indecision cost him his chance. Unlike Inigo, who had a 1-to-1 kill count, Hamlet's revenge had a body count about a half dozen bigger than it needed to be. Because of this, his story isn't as satisfying and, in the end, feels much less like justice and much more like a, tragedy. But does that inefficiency make Hamlet's revenge plot evil? Some scholars, such as Stanford University professor Eleanor Prosser, argue that, yes, it does. Quote, "The surrender to revenge is seen as the surrender of reason." She argues that Hamlet's true evil manifests in his specific desire to cast his uncle to hell, as seen by his refusal to kill him while he's praying. To me, Hamlet just seems a bit immature and overwhelmed, somehow indecisive and impulsive at the same time, which allowed things to get out of hand in a way he didn't intend. There's even a line in the 1948 film adaptation that describes the story as the tragedy of a man who couldn't make up his mind. When you compare him to Inigo, Hamlet almost seems cruel, blinded by his lust for revenge and willing to do whatever it takes, even at his own expense. In cases like that, would it be better to just let go, forgive and forget? The way these characters talk about revenge, that almost doesn't seem like an option, like they're compelled to do this thing by the cosmic scales of justice. But honestly, nobody is forcing these characters to end their quests with more bloodshed. If they wanted to, they could just walk away. And, to their credit, there are a few stories out there that start with the character formulating some grand scheme for exacting their vengeance, but then, when the big moment finally comes, they just decide it's not worth it. And when you set the concept of justice as a fundamentally good thing aside, this actually seems like it might be the more moral path, right? Refusing to cause more harm despite what your fevered emotions are telling you? Even so, moral isn't always the same thing as satisfying. The right thing is so often the opposite of the fulfilling thing. But in some interesting cases, it can indeed be both. In fact, sometimes mercy is even crueler. There's an episode of the show Avatar: The Last Airbender that demonstrates this really nicely. It's called The Southern Raiders, and it's about a young waterbender named Katara who has just discovered the location of the man who killed her mother when she was a child. She remembers him as a cruel, evil man who ripped her mother away from her in cold blood, which is true, but by the time she finally tracks him down, he is not what she expected. In the years since her mother's death, this once ruthless killer has become pretty pathetic. He's old and weak and lives at the mercy of his demanding mother. Seeing this, and conflicted about the idea of taking a life herself, in the end, Katara decides to spare him, but not before roasting him nearly to death.
I always wondered what kind of person could do such a thing, but now that I see you, I think I understand. There's just nothing inside you. Nothing at all. You're pathetic and sad and empty. But as much as I hate you, I just can't do it.
Though we don't see Katara get the revenge she had set out for, I actually really like this. It's satisfying to see Katara differentiate herself from her mother's murderer by deciding not to do the same thing at all, even for the sake of justice. That might have felt unfulfilling to me as a member of the audience, but that's part of what makes this particular beat so clever. Allowing this old man, shell of his former military glory that he is, to continue his pitiful little existence running errands for his mother until he dies, honestly seems like it might be a fate worse than death anyway. And if that isn't enough to sell you on her choice, there's also the question of functionality to consider here. Remember earlier when I compared the death penalty to revenge? That's a good example of what I mean by functional. If you feel there's no hope for a killer to reform, then this punishment seems as though it would have a tangible purpose, removing them from society and keeping them from committing more murders. If Kitara had killed the old man, it wouldn't actually have solved anything. His military days are long since over. It's not like he's still much of a threat to anyone. For her, it would have been purely emotional, which, though completely understandable, is also somewhat indulgent, perhaps. It would have begged the question, is she the kind of person for whom murder is ever the correct emotional remedy? Instead, because she's able to hold that pain within her and let him live, she looks like the master of her own emotions. Her values are intact. She doesn't need to stoop to his level. She's the bigger person, and everyone knows it, especially him. Which brings me to an interesting thought. Although a life for a life is proportionate in Kitara's case, it's also much tidier than letting this guy live. She could just snuff him out, mete out justice then and there, bring the thing to its ultimate just conclusion. After death, what other tricky plot twists can a person create in your life? I think this is part of why the stakes in revenge plots so often center on murder, and why it's interesting, jarring, and, oddly, almost even more malicious when vengeance is exacted in different ways. I can think of no better example of this than the 2012 video game Dishonored. You play as Corvo Atano, the bodyguard turned lover of an empress who, after being attacked by a group of assassins and watching her daughter get kidnapped, dies in your arms. You, of course, are framed for these crimes and spend the entire game trying to get back at all those who ruined your life. This is a game that leaves very little about its morality up to your imagination. It has a good ending and a bad ending. If you kill everyone you're after, you get the bad ending. If you find non-lethal ways to take your hit list out, you get the good ending. So I guess that's the solution. Revenge via killing people is bad, but revenge, if you don't murder anybody, is good. Oh, of course, it's not that simple. Sure, you can choose alternate ways to get your revenge that don't involve bloodshed, but some of those non-lethal methods are far worse than flat-out murdering these people. In the fan-favorite level, Lady Boyle's Last Party, you have to infiltrate a masquerade ball and take out your target, one of the 3 masked Boyle sisters. And again, you have a choice to make. You could simply end her life, get it over with, move on to your next mark. Or you could make her disappear in a much quieter fashion. Because, you see, you meet a man earlier in the level who is obsessed with Lady Boyle, who has a plan in place to take her away on a boat, if only you'll deliver her to him unconscious. Seriously, that's your other option. It doesn't take much imagination to see why being a woman kidnapped by your stalker may present a fate worse than death. It also forces you to reassess whatever morality you had been trying to assign to Corvo over the course of your playthrough. This is a man bent on avenging his lover and rescuing his daughter, yet he has no qualms with what is essentially trafficking another young woman? Yikes. This is apparently who you're playing as. And somehow you're supposed to think of this character, and by extension yourself, as the good guy? So, to get the bad ending, you quietly kill all your marks. Okay, that checks out. Murder is bad. To get the good ending, you traffic a young woman's unconscious body. Right. Good. But I think there's actually an interesting point in all of this. Justice isn't actually about proportionality. That can certainly make it feel more measured and reasonable. But when you get right down to it, outside functional purposes like getting murderers out of the public, justice is just a very emotional thing. Unto itself, It is absolutely not necessary at all. It just makes you feel better, even when it moves you to do things you would otherwise consider evil. Remember at the start of the video when I called you out for the revenge fantasies that I know you have from time to time? Still not sorry about that. I think it's true. Humans do think about this stuff. Heck, from time to time I think about this stuff. But I also don't think the average person will usually go out of their way to harm anybody, regardless of how powerful that yearning for justice may be. Those are the dark thoughts, the things you push down and repress to live in a functional society. Yet, as with all repressed urges, there's always the threat that they may bubble up to the surface. And there, fiction can and does certainly help. Because fiction, as we know, can give you blessed catharsis, a safe release of all those pent-up emotions. There's a specific breed of horror that seems to center around revenge fantasies. Some titles in this arena are too disturbing to mention here, and I honestly worry that they go over the line from catharsis to other, less savory emotions. However, there are a few that actually sort of make sense, even though they are so brutal. The book Carrie by Stephen King is a great example of this. It's about a troubled high school girl who is relentlessly tormented by her peers in a variety of increasingly cruel ways. It finally comes to a head at prom when she unleashes her latent telekinetic powers to basically level the entire town. Clearly, this revenge is not at all proportional or functional. She's so enraged that she even kills people who were her friends. But even so, it's hard not to cheer her on. I mean, the world has been so cruel to her. In a messed up kind of way, it sort of feels like everyone just getting what they deserve. When she dies at the end of the story, I can't say I wasn't a little disappointed that I didn't get to see the full extent of her outburst. Maybe this time I did want to see a few more gas stations explode. And maybe that's because, like so many of you watching, I know what it's like to be bullied. My face is all over the internet after all. What can I say? It's a bit cathartic. Almost everyone, in some way or another, has experienced what Carrie has. And it feels kind of good to project onto her, get a little bit of satisfaction from her fulfilled revenge arc. The kind of thing you think about in the darkest corners of your mind, but would never in a million years act on, because despite the catharsis, you know that what she's doing is still evil. There are a lot of books and movies like this, most that I cannot recommend you watch, especially if you're squeamish. Revenge horror, which is often in a category with torture porn, often centers on women like Carrie who are driven to do things that are absolutely wrong, who in any other context you would revile, but who also, in the context of their stories and all the horrors they've been made to endure at the hands of their abusers, you cannot help but root for. These stories create a context where, perversely, you might actually find that you enjoy watching someone be evil. And, I mean, who could blame you? Justice is a thing so often held up as fundamentally good, but the truth is that justice is often a moralized mask for revenge. And, as we've seen, revenge is messy. There is no amount of proportionality or serviceable function that can make it definitively good or evil. It can be justifiable, it can be satisfying, it can even be useful. But at the same time, it can be convoluted and terrible and leave a bad taste in your mouth. The only thing we can really say definitively about the idea of revenge is that it is powerful. In the words of author William Goldman, life isn't fair, it's just fairer than death. That's all. I think it's pretty understandable that given all the terribly unjust things that happen in this world, there's such a strong yearning to tip the scales back a bit. Take that power into your own hands. Fix this world's unfairness, no matter the cost. And make no mistake, as we've seen in so many stories, vengeance can, and just might, cost you everything. And I'm afraid that's all for this week. Our next video will be coming out in a week from now, So I'll see you then. Unless, of course, you don't want to wait. We've actually made a ton of stuff that isn't up here on YouTube, like this video about the morphology of angels and why artists always give them wings, or this one about artificial life as a magic system. We even made a whole original series called Worldsmiths about our favorite authors and the unique landscapes of their minds. And, of course, if you just don't want to wait, next week's YouTube video is actually already out and ready to be watched. That's right. You can watch it right now, ad-free, along with everything else I just mentioned, over on our streaming platform, Nebula. YouTube is kind of a crazy place to make content. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy to have this platform, but you have to be so careful about your topic choices, your packaging, what you include in your videos. You just start to feel like you're walking on eggshells. Nebula doesn't have any of those concerns. It's an entirely different environment, devoid of all the weird YouTube cynicism. The entire platform was built by creators for creators. Every time you watch a video there, a creator you love is getting paid, and far more than they would ever get paid on YouTube. And on top of that, Nebula even helps its creators to fund incredible original content. You know, like our series, Worldsmiths. And we're not the only ones who have been busy over there. So many other amazing creators have started creating and sharing their own unique stuff on Nebula, like our friend Frankie from the channel A Bit Frank, or Tim from the channel Hello Future Me. Heck, there's even a high-production, independently run sci-fi audio drama over there called The Sojourn, which is just so good. I've been listening to it while working lately and loving every second of it. Nebula is just a really unique, fun, fresh environment. It kind of makes watching videos on the internet fun again. Speaking of which, here's the really fun part. Nebula is already cheaper than almost any other streaming platform on the internet, like $2.50 per month. That cheap. But right now, for a limited time only, we're offering you the chance to get Nebula for life. Just $300 one time, and you never have to pay again. No matter how big the platform gets, how fancy the content gets, unlike other streaming services, you can pay for this once and have access to it forever if you want to. In fact, right now you can even gift a lifetime subscription to a friend. All you have to do to get started is click the link in the description or go to go.nebula.tv/TaleFoundry and sign up for 1 year. That's it. Again, that's just $2.50 a month or $300 one time to get access for life. Frankly, I'm not quite sure how they can afford to do all this, but I'm definitely not complaining. Seriously, take advantage of this offer while it's still going. I don't think any better one exists in the world of streaming. Anyway, that's all for this one. Thanks for watching and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next week. Bye!